We, 26F/29M, are visiting his mother for Christmas. Last time we saw her, there was a massive argument. At 26 years old, I found myself navigating the unfamiliar terrain of a serious relationship with Danny, a man 3 years my senior. Our bond, though relatively new, had become significant enough that I had packed up my life to move to a new city with him. Danny had dreams of advancing his career, and pursuing further education in this new place was the next step toward those aspirations. Supporting him felt like the right thing to do, but I'd be lying if I said the move didn't feel like a gamble. I had always been anchored by my big, bustling family, a chaotic, loving web of 5 siblings, 13 nieces and nephews, and an endless cascade of cousins. Our gatherings were loud and vibrant, filled with the kind of bickering that could make outsiders uncomfortable but was second nature to us. We spoke over each other, teased relentlessly, and sometimes shouted just to be heard above the wailing of babies. It was a cacophony of love, a chorus of connection. But not everyone understood that. My boyfriend, Danny, had remarked more than once that conversations between my mother and me sounded like arguments. He wasn't the first to say so. I'd learned to accept that to people who hadn't grown up in my family's boisterous atmosphere, our tone could easily be mistaken for aggression. It was a cultural and familial rhythm that felt natural to me but jarring to others. Danny's upbringing couldn't have been more different. He was the only child of a single mother, who, after 2 divorces, had raised him with a reserved demeanor. Their home had been quieter, more structured, and free from the relentless noise of siblings vying for attention. The contrast between his background and mine sometimes felt like a gulf, but we bridged it with understanding and communication, or so I thought. There were moments when Danny would look at me with genuine concern and ask, "Are you upset?" His question would leave me confused. I wasn't upset. In fact, I often felt perfectly fine. But over time, I realized that my natural tone, loud, firm, and occasionally abrupt, might not come across the way I intended. Determined to make our relationship work, I began to monitor my reactions more carefully. I didn't want Danny to feel like he was walking on eggshells around me or, worse, that I was angry with him. The truth was, I wasn't angry with Danny. Ever. He had hurt my feelings a couple of times, sure, but we always resolved our issues quickly and with care. Our relationship had been a haven of calm and kindness. We spoke to each other with respect, offered meaningful apologies when we stumbled, and never resorted to shouting or unkind words. That mutual gentleness was part of what made me believe in us, despite our differences. Still, our move had introduced new pressures. Danny's mother, a spirited 50-year-old woman who wasn't shy about speaking her mind, had come to help us. I appreciated her assistance, but the stress of the move loomed over us all. We were behind schedule, racing against the cold December winds in a region where the freezing temperatures could bite through even the thickest layers of clothing. The process of uprooting our lives was grueling. I tried to keep a brave face, even as I felt the weight of it all bearing down on me. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. This was my first time leaving home, and while Danny's presence should have been comforting, I couldn't shake the creeping sense of vulnerability. I had no car, no job, and no local support system. My family, my safety net, was now a 12-hour drive away. I threw myself into the move, trying to stay positive despite the gnawing fears. When Danny's mother picked up my monstera, a plant I had painstakingly nursed back to life, and walked toward the freezing outdoors without covering it, my instincts kicked in. "No, no, no!" I shouted, my voice loud and urgent as I dashed to stop her. I scrambled to find something, anything, to shield the plant from the biting cold. My prized monstera wasn't just a plant to me, it was a testament to my patience, my nurturing spirit, and my ability to bring life back from the brink. As I hurried to wrap the plant in plastic, I realized my tone had likely come across as sharp. I wasn't angry at Danny's mother, not even a little. But in my panic, my voice had risen, and I hadn't stopped to consider how it might sound. My chest tightened as I replayed the moment in my mind. What if I had offended her? What if she thought I was ungrateful or rude? The last thing I wanted was to create tension with the one person Danny relied on most. On the 12-hour drive to our new home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My voice had been deeper than usual, likely due to the cold I was battling, and I wondered if that had made my reaction seem even harsher. As the miles rolled by, I resolved to apologize to her once we were settled. It seemed like the right thing to do, a small gesture to smooth over what might have been a misunderstanding. But the move had drained us all. By the time we arrived at our new apartment, it was late, and the exhaustion was palpable. We hauled box after box up the stairs in silence, our breath visible in the frigid night air. My head throbbed, my muscles ached, and the sickness that had been simmering in the background now threatened to boil over. Still, I forced myself to keep going. I wanted Danny to see that I could handle this, that I could be strong for him even when I felt anything but. As I began to unpack and make the beds, I clung to the hope that things would settle down. I had no idea that the storm brewing inside Danny's mother would soon erupt, and that my attempt to apologize would only fan the flames. Plants have always been a source of joy and calm for me. They are my therapy, my escape, and my connection to something steady and living. My fascination with them began in childhood, watching my grandmother tend to her roses with the same care and precision one might use to prepare a feast for honored guests. Over the years, I've built my own collection, each plant holding its own story. Among my treasures is a giant monstera, a plant that once stood on the brink of death. I found it years ago, its leaves riddled with pests and drooping as though it had already given up. But something about its state called to me. I nursed it back to life, dedicating hours to cleaning its leaves, nurturing its soil, and coaxing it to grow. Seeing it thrive again felt like a personal victory. It wasn't just a plant, it was proof that with enough patience and care, even the most neglected things can flourish. So, when Danny's mother, arms full of my monstera, made her way to the door of our old apartment on that freezing December day, my heart leapt in panic. No, no, no! I shouted instinctively, my voice rising louder than I intended. I darted toward her, frantic to stop her from stepping into the subzero temperatures with my prized possession. She froze mid-step, staring at me with wide eyes as if I'd just sounded an air raid siren. "It's fine," I said, grabbing a plastic sheet to wrap around the plant. "It'll die if it's exposed to the cold." My voice was firm but rushed. I tried to explain, but her expression stayed stiff, a mixture of confusion and, perhaps, irritation. I didn't think much of it in the moment. My only concern was the plant. Once it was safely wrapped, I thanked her for helping and returned to the task of packing. The interaction was over in a matter of seconds or so, I thought. The incident stuck with me on the drive to our new city. The stress of the move combined with the onset of the cold made me feel irritable and tired, but that moment replayed in my mind. Had my reaction been too sharp? My voice had been louder and deeper than usual, thanks to my sore throat and general exhaustion. What if I'd come off as rude? Danny's mom and I didn't know each other well enough for me to assume she'd understand my tone or my love for that monstera. I turned to Danny as we drove through endless stretches of snow-dusted highway. "Do you think I snapped at your mom earlier?" I asked hesitantly. Danny glanced at me, his face thoughtful. "She didn't say anything to me about it," he replied. "But maybe it did come across a little intense." I sighed, sinking into the passenger seat. I wasn't angry at her. I just really didn't want the plant to die. "It means a lot to me." "You could explain that to her," he suggested. "I'm sure she'd understand." I nodded, resolving to apologize as soon as things settled. It wasn't worth letting an unintentional tone sour our relationship. The 12-hour drive felt endless. By the time we reached our new apartment, it was pitch black outside, the air sharp and unforgiving. Every muscle in my body ached as we carried box after box up the narrow stairs to our third-floor unit. Danny's mom worked tirelessly alongside us, her determination admirable despite the late hour. I tried to stay positive, even as my head pounded and my throat burned. After the last box was brought inside, I pushed myself to start unpacking, eager to make our new space feel like home. Danny's mom busied herself in the kitchen, and I thought nothing of it until she suddenly appeared in the doorway, her face tight with anger. "We need to talk," she announced, her voice clipped. I turned to face her, surprised. "Sure," I said cautiously, setting down the stack of linens I'd been folding. Her eyes bore into mine as she crossed her arms. "I've been stewing on this all day," she began. "That whole scene with the plant. That was completely over the top. It's just a goddamn plant. I thought something serious had happened." Her words hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to respond, but she continued, her voice rising. "You were so rude. I thought you wanted to fight me. Do you treat your own mother that way?" I blinked, taken aback by the intensity of her tone. "I'm really sorry," I said quickly, my heart racing. "I didn't mean to come across that way. I wasn't angry with you at all, I was just worried about the plant. It didn't even occur to me that it might sound aggressive." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, she seemed angrier. "So, you're saying you would throw a tantrum like that with your own mother?" she demanded, her voice dripping with incredulity. I hesitated, unsure how to navigate the question. Honesty felt like the best approach. "Yes," I admitted. "I do speak to my mom like that sometimes. It's just how my family communicates. But I understand that it can come across as aggressive to people who aren't used to it. I'm really sorry if I made you uncomfortable." Her gaze didn't waver. "It's not just about making me uncomfortable," she snapped. "It's about basic respect. You need to learn how to control yourself. It sure would be a shame if your relationship with Danny were affected by this." The weight of her words sank in slowly, like stones dropping into a deep well. Was she threatening me? My stomach churned as I fumbled for a response. "I truly didn't mean any disrespect," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings." She didn't look satisfied. Her arms stayed crossed, her eyes narrowing. The conversation dragged on, her accusations circling back to the same point. It was just a plant, and I had overreacted. I apologized again and again, each one feeling emptier than the last. By the time she finally said, "I forgive you," it felt like a dismissal rather than a resolution. I retreated to the bedroom, my mind spinning. Her words echoed in my head, each one sharper than the last. It wasn't just her anger that unsettled me, it was the way she seemed determined to put me in my place, to assert some kind of dominance over me. I had apologized repeatedly, but it felt like she wanted more. What, exactly? I didn't know. A piece of me, perhaps. A pound of flesh. That night, I barely slept. The apartment felt cold and unwelcoming, a far cry from the home I had envisioned. Danny asked if I was okay, and I told him the truth. No, I wasn't. I felt humiliated, disrespected, and completely alone. He listened quietly but offered little comfort, his silence a stark contrast to the warmth I so desperately needed. By dawn, I knew one thing for certain: the tension between his mother and me wasn't going to dissolve on its own. The apology I had offered to Danny's mother the night before lingered in my mind like a bad aftertaste. I had done everything I could to express regret, but it felt hollow. Not because I wasn't sincere, but because no matter how much I apologized, it seemed like she wanted something I couldn't give. Her words played on repeat in my head: "It's just a goddamn plant." And worse, it sure would be a shame if that changed. The insinuation gnawed at me. Was she threatening my relationship with Danny? Was she testing me, pushing to see how far I would bend? I wanted to believe I was reading too much into it, but the sharp tone in her voice and the unrelenting way she had hammered the point home told me otherwise. She hadn't just wanted an apology, she had wanted a confession, an admission that I was wrong and unworthy in some fundamental way. Danny noticed I was upset as I climbed into bed that night. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "No," I said honestly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel humiliated and disrespected." His face tightened, but he didn't respond. I couldn't tell if he was angry, uncomfortable, or simply unsure of what to say. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze before retreating to his side of the bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Sleep didn't come easily. My cat, unsettled by the move, meowed incessantly, her cries echoing my own internal turmoil. At some point, I gave up on trying to sleep in bed and locked myself in the bathroom with her. I curled up on the cold tile floor, stroking her fur until she finally quieted around 4 in the morning. The exhaustion was bone deep, but my mind refused to shut off. I kept replaying the conversation, imagining how it could have gone differently. Maybe if I had been more composed, or more deferential, things wouldn't have spiraled. By the time morning rolled around, my body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. My throat burned, my muscles ached, and my head throbbed. The cold I had been fighting was now in full swing, and every ounce of my energy was devoted to just keeping myself upright. I shuffled into the kitchen, still in my pajamas, hoping for a quiet moment to myself. But there she was, Danny's mother. She stood by the counter, sipping her coffee, and her eyes snapped to me the moment I entered the room. I forced a smile and offered a quiet, "Good morning." Her response came quickly, sharp and pointed. "Danny says you aren't over last night." I froze, her words sinking in like a stone in water. "So much for moving on. I really don't think we should talk about this right now," I said carefully, my voice steady but weak. "I'm very tired, and I'm not feeling well. I don't want to say something I don't mean." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone defensive. I resisted the urge to sigh. "It means I'm not in a good place to have this conversation," I said firmly. "I'd rather wait until I'm feeling better." For a moment, I thought she might let it go. Her mouth tightened, and she took another sip of coffee as though weighing her next move. But then she spoke again, her voice laden with implication. "Well, Danny is really upset, so I think we should talk about it." That was my first mistake, letting her bring Danny into it. My second mistake was not standing my ground. Instead, I hesitated, unsure of how to navigate the situation without making it worse. And that hesitation was all she needed to press forward. Danny walked into the kitchen a moment later, his hair still messy from sleep. He looked at me, then at his mother, and my heart sank. I could already tell he wasn't going to step in. He was going to stay silent, and I was going to have to handle this on my own. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "It wasn't just a plant," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "It's very important to me. I felt like you weren't respecting my belongings, and that hurt." Her reaction was immediate and explosive. She threw her hands up in exasperation, her voice rising as she began to caricature my reaction. "Oh, no. The poor plant. What a tragedy," she mocked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You'd think someone had died with the way you carried on." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I wasn't trying to be dramatic," I said quietly. "I was just trying to protect something that matters to me." But she wasn't listening. She kept going, repeating the same points over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. "It's just a plant," she said again, as though that somehow invalidated my feelings. "You need to get your priorities straight. And you need to learn how to talk to people." Her voice rose with each sentence, her words echoing in the small kitchen. I glanced at Danny, hoping, praying for him to intervene. But he just stood there, staring at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The betrayal stung almost as much as her words. I felt the tears spill over, hot and uncontrollable. I don't cry in front of people ever. Not even in front of Danny. Except for the one time when my brand new car broke down and I couldn't afford to fix it. He knows how rare it is for me to cry, how much it takes for me to let my guard down like that. And yet, he said nothing. I need a break, I said abruptly, my voice breaking as I turned and left the kitchen. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't trust myself to stay composed if I did. The cold air outside hit me like a slap as I stepped onto the sidewalk, my tears freezing against my cheeks. I walked aimlessly, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on me like a physical force. When I couldn't hold it in any longer, I called my mom, her familiar voice soothing me even as I sobbed into the phone. "You don't need to talk to her again," she said firmly. "There's nothing you can say that will make this better. Focus on taking care of yourself and getting some rest." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I don't know what to do, Mom," I admitted. "I feel so alone." "You're not alone," she said gently. "You have us. And if this relationship doesn't work out, you'll have a way back home. I promise." Her words were a lifeline, but they didn't erase the sinking feeling in my chest. I had tried to build a life with Danny, but now I wasn't sure if I could trust him to have my back. By the time I returned to the apartment, I felt like a shadow of myself. I avoided Danny and his mother for the rest of the day, retreating to the bedroom to sleep off the exhaustion and the cold that had fully taken hold of my body. Danny's mother left the next day, but her presence lingered like a storm cloud. The apartment, once filled with promise, now felt suffocating. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The days following Danny's mother's departure were a blur of unease and despair. I slept more than I ever had in my life, waking only when the waves of sadness or sickness dragged me to the surface. Each time I woke, I would remember where I was, what had happened, and my chest would tighten all over again. Danny was a ghost in those days, present but distant, his words sparse and his comfort non-existent. He didn't say much about the confrontation, and the silence between us felt heavier than any argument ever could. The apartment, which I had once envisioned as a fresh start for the two of us, now felt suffocating. Every corner seemed to echo with tension. I went about my days mechanically, unpacking boxes, cleaning surfaces, and arranging our things in an attempt to make the space feel less foreign. But no matter how much I did, the atmosphere didn't improve. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the loneliness gnawed at me. This wasn't just a new city, it was isolation. I had no car, no job, and no one to lean on. My family, my rock, was 12 hours away. Every time I thought about that distance, the knot in my stomach tightened. What would I do if this relationship fell apart? The question haunted me. The logistics alone were overwhelming. How would I pack up my things, my cat, and somehow find a way back to the only place that had ever felt safe? But even more than the practical concerns, there was the emotional weight of it all. I had uprooted my entire life for Danny. I had trusted him to be my partner, my support. And when I needed him most, when his mother tore me down in front of him, he had stood there, silent. That silence hurt more than anything she said. It was a betrayal I wasn't sure I could forgive. Still, I tried. As the days passed, I worked hard to rebuild some semblance of normalcy between us. I made his meals, cleaned the apartment, and tried to be open emotionally despite the walls I could feel rising inside me. Danny, to his credit, seemed to sense the tension. He would occasionally ask if I was okay, but his questions felt hesitant, almost perfunctory. I wasn't sure if he didn't know how to help or if he didn't want to. Either way, the result was the same. I felt alone. The isolation became a routine. I applied for jobs, visited the gym, and did everything I could to stay busy. But the nagging depression lingered, an unwelcome companion that sapped my energy and made everything feel heavier than it should. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself that this was temporary, that things would get better. But the truth was, I didn't know if they would. Then, there was Christmas. The trip home loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, dark and unavoidable. We would be spending 3 days with our families, my parents, who I desperately missed, and Danny's mother, who I now dreaded seeing. Just the thought of it made me feel sick. What if she berated me again? What if she found another reason to tear me down? And what if Danny stayed silent, just like before? The possibility was unbearable. I tried to imagine myself sitting there, taking it, swallowing my pride and my pain while she dissected me in front of him. I didn't know if I could do it. The questions spun in my head, each one more anxiety-inducing than the last. If things went badly, would I have to leave? How would I break the lease? What would I take with me? How would I even get home? The logistics seemed impossible, but the alternative, staying in a situation where I felt unsupported and unsafe, felt equally untenable. I confided my fears to my mom during a late-night phone call. She listened patiently, her voice steady and reassuring. "If it comes to that," she said, "you'll always have a place here. Don't worry about the logistics. We'll figure it out. You just need to focus on what's best for you." Her words brought a small measure of comfort, but they didn't erase the fear. This wasn't just about logistics, it was about my relationship with Danny, about whether we had a future together. The idea of giving up on us hurt more than I could put into words. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. If things didn't change, if he couldn't stand up for me when it mattered most, I wasn't sure I could stay. The night before we were set to leave, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Danny slept beside me, his breathing steady and oblivious to the storm raging in my mind. I felt a pang of envy at how easily he seemed to move past things, how little the confrontation with his mother seemed to weigh on him. For me, it was everything. It was the foundation of our relationship, shaken to its core. When morning came, I dragged myself out of bed, my stomach in knots as I packed for the trip. Danny noticed my unease but didn't comment. I could tell he was looking forward to seeing his mom, and I didn't want to take that from him. But inside, I felt like I was walking into a lion's den. The drive home was long and quiet. Danny tried to make small talk, but I was too wrapped up in my thoughts to engage. When we finally pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt a wave of relief. Being back in a place that felt safe, even temporarily, was like taking a deep breath after holding it for far too long. But the relief was short-lived. Danny's mother was only a few miles away, and the thought of seeing her again sent a fresh wave of anxiety crashing over me. I didn't know how the next few days would unfold, but one thing was clear: this trip would be a turning point. If Danny couldn't stand by me, if he couldn't show me that I mattered as much as his relationship with his mother, I knew I couldn't stay. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of clarity. I didn't deserve to feel this way, to feel unsupported, disrespected, and alone. And if this relationship couldn't give me the partnership I needed, then I would find a way to stand on my own.